This video comes from my Archaeology Corroborates the Bible series. Entries in this series are based on the book Unearthing the Bible, written by Titus Kennedy. Kennedy looks at 101 archaeological discoveries that bring the Bible to life. Dr. Titus Kennedy is a professional field archaeologist, an adjunct professor at Biola University, a research fellow at Discovery Institute, and has been a consultant, writer, and guide for history and archaeology documentaries and curricula. Kennedy currently directs archaeological projects in Bible lands, and he has researched and photographed artifacts from around the world. Artifacts left behind from the vanished ancient world of the Bible have been found and recovered through archaeology. What is an artifact? In simple terms, an artifact is an ancient object made or modified by humans, and many have been found, especially in recent years, at archaeological sites around the world. Artifacts include statues, altars, jewelry, weapons, tools, inscriptions, paintings, coins, scarabs, tablets, papyri, stelae, reliefs, and pottery, showcasing the artistic and technological prowess of the ancients. But more importantly, artifacts tell stories of the past. They serve as both visual and informational aids that provide insight into that ancient context and toward an accurate understanding and interpretation. The Bible is a collection of books written millennia ago in places and cultures far removed from modern readers, but artifacts can give us essential knowledge of the ancient world and help us avoid the problem of unconsciously or inadvertently viewing a passage or book in the context of a modern society and time. Because the Bible contains stories from the ancient world, written in a style different than the method of modern historians and paired with theology, many have assumed that the narratives in the Bible are myth, legend, and propaganda instead of accurate history. In fact, the majority of scholars, most media and educational sources, and many in the general public regard the Bible as a fairy tale and frequently portray it as unimportant or irrelevant beyond literary and religious studies. For years, the Bible's been routinely attacked and disregarded on the basis of history or archaeology. And yet, when people look into what archaeologists have unearthed, a different story comes to light, showing that instead of fiction and fairy tales, archaeology indicates that the Bible preserves an accurate recounting of the history addressed in its pages. Specifically, hundreds of artifacts from the distant past have demonstrated the events, people, and places in the Bible to be historical. The Israelites in Egypt, Exodus, and the wilderness, Exodus through Deuteronomy. For most modern scholars of archaeology, ancient history, and the Bible, the events of the Exodus and wandering are considered mythological. These scholars declare that there is no evidence that Hebrews lived in Egypt, no evidence related to the events of the Exodus, and no evidence of the Israelites wandering in the wilderness. Several artifacts, however, suggest otherwise and actually support many elements of the Exodus and wandering narratives. Israelite life in Egypt and the Jews' subsequent enslavement there, the Exodus led by Moses, and the wandering in the wilderness were recorded in the books of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Previously, the family of Jacob had settled in the northeastern Nile Delta region and multiplied their population over following generations. However, when the Egyptians from the south conquered the north and established the 18th dynasty around 1570 BC, a pharaoh who had no knowledge of Joseph took over the area and enslaved the Semites originally from Western Asia, including the family of Israelites who had become a numerous people. After many years, Moses returned from his exile to Midian and requested that the Pharaoh let the Israelites leave Egypt to worship God. But the Pharaoh refused, and 10 plagues ravaged the land before the Israelites were able to leave. Once free from the grip of the Pharaoh, however, the people wandered for about 40 years in the wilderness, until finally going to the promised land of Canaan in the late Bronze Age around 1500 to 1200 BC. According to chronological information from the Bible, these events spanned a period of almost 300 years, while geographic information places the events in Egypt until the wilderness wandering period. In this section, the majority of artifacts are Egyptian and originate primarily from this time or are directly related to events of the period. These artifacts include papyri, artwork, and official stone inscriptions that document or illuminate the time in which the Israelites were in Egypt, the Exodus itself, and the period of the wandering. First in this section, the 16th in this series of videos, we look at the Hebrew servants in Egypt, which is corroborated by the existence of Papyrus Brooklyn, an Egyptian list of domestic servants recorded on a papyrus from about the 17th century BC, contains not only Semitic names but even Hebrew names. A papyrus, plural papyri, is an early writing material similar to paper made from the papyrus plant. This period came just after the life of Joseph and preceded the Exodus, which was the time that the Hebrews lived in Egypt as settlers and then as slaves. A section of this papyrus containing a list of 95 servants, many of whom were specified as Asiatic or coming from Western Asia, primarily Canaan. This second intermediate period document was rediscovered on the antiquities market and designated Papyrus Brooklyn 35.1446. Several references to Tebes on the papyrus indicate that it was originally composed in or around that city, the capital of Upper Egypt. That might be Thebes with an H. The dates for the pharaohs from this period are often tentative and highly disputed, so it is difficult to date anything with absolute certainty. However, the papyrus mentions the pharaoh called Sobekhotep, who seems to have reigned around 1700 BC. The servants with foreign names are given Egyptian names, just as Joseph was after he was promoted from a household servant under Potiphar to the role of vizier over all Egypt. The majority of the names are feminine because domestic servants were typically female. Approximately 30 of the servants have names identified as Semitic, but more relevant to the Exodus story is that 9 of these servants appear to have specifically Hebrew names. The Hebrew names found on the list are Menahem, a feminine form of Menahem, which is found in 2 Kings 15:14, Asherah, a feminine form of Asher, the name of one of Jacob's sons, found in Genesis 30, verse 13, Shiphrah, the name of one of the Hebrew midwives prior to the Exodus, found in Exodus 1, verse 15, Akobah, a name appearing to be a feminine form of Issachar, which is found in Genesis 30, verse 18, Wadi Huat, a compound name utilizing the name David, which is found in 1 Samuel 16:13, Eseb, a name derived from the Hebrew word eseb, meaning herb, which is found in Deuteronomy 32, verse 2. Haya, or another compound name composed of Haya or Eve, found in Genesis 3:20. And finally, the name Hebrew, which appears to be an Egyptian transcription of the word Hebrew, which is found in Genesis 39, verse 14. Therefore, this list is a clear attestation of Hebrews living in Egypt prior to the Exodus under Moses in their earlier period of residence in the country prior to their total enslavement, and perhaps shows that a group may have migrated south or was taken south for work. Exodus chapter 1, verse 15 says, quote, "Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah." Exodus 1, verse 15. So this just shows archaeological evidence that Hebrew servants existed in Egypt somewhere near when the time of the Exodus is purported to have occurred. This is archaeological evidence corroborating biblical history. I see the evidence of your good.